And good afternoon. It is Thursday, October 20th. My name is Ryan Bellamore, and I am the owner and publisher of What's Up Noop. Early voting opened yesterday in Rhode Island. All month long, we have been bringing you interviews with the candidates. We have about 105 invites out and 70 interviews scheduled. So we are making our way through the candidates this month. If you want to see any of the interviews we've already done, you can find them all on whatsupnoop.com. They've also been turned into podcasts. And we are all the way from school committees, all the way up to Congressional District 1 and Congressional District 2. Joining me today is Mr. Frank Prosnitz, as he does when we have special guests, and as well as Congressman David Cicilline. And good afternoon, Congressman.
Good afternoon. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for being here.
My pleasure.
And go ahead there, Frank.
So I guess my first question actually goes to what's happened over the last 24 hours, and that's Kevin McCarthy's threat, I guess, that if Republicans take over the House of Representatives, that he will make an effort to curb funding to Ukraine. And I look at that on top of what happened at OPEC and the 2 million barrels that have been cut back, and what kind of message does that send to Putin?
Yeah, no, it's a terrible message. I mean, the war in Ukraine that was precipitated by the unjustified, unlawful invasion by Russia under the direction of Vladimir Putin is not only a threat to the Ukrainian people, but to people who care about democracy all over the world. If we let a thuggish dictator redraw the lines of a country by force or take parts of a country by force, no country is safe. And so I think everyone recognizes that this is not just Ukraine's fight. It's the fight of democracy-loving people around the world. And that's why I'm proud the United States has stood very strongly with the Ukrainian people. The president has brought together this extraordinary coalition, not only of our NATO allies, but allies around the world who are supporting the Ukrainians, who are literally fighting and dying to defend their democracy. And when we have the Republican leader pandering to the fringes of his own party by making a statement like that, it's a terrible message to the Ukrainians. It's a terrible message to the world. We have to demonstrate our willingness to stand by and support the Ukrainian people in this fight. And it has implications for the peace and security of the world and for our own national security. So it's a terrible message. And you layer that on top of what you just mentioned about the Saudis and the Russians. It's really important that we stand together with our European allies. We're going to confront a really difficult winter, as we are, but there's a lot at stake in this election, and that's just one of the issues.
Congressman, from Russia back to Rhode Island, and I like to ask every candidate this, but what are you hearing over the last few years, or during this campaign season, that are the true highest priorities for Rhode Islanders in Congressional District 2?
I mean, the most important priority that I hear about from constituents right now is, of course, the cost of things. Food prices, gas prices, concerns about home heating oil this winter. Inflation is a really big challenge. And even though people recognize very often it's a global problem, this was this gigantic disruption because of COVID and supply chains, it doesn't matter. It still makes it hard for people to feed their families and put gas in their car and get to work. And so driving down costs is the number one priority for me. I know it is for all the House Democrats. We put forth a really good plan, the Inflation Reduction Act, that will bring down the cost of healthcare, bring down the cost of prescription drugs, bring down the cost of insulin, make a dramatic investment in renewable energy to help bring down energy costs. But we also have to go after the big oil companies that are gouging consumers. The FTC has the authority to do that. We passed a bill in the House to give them additional authority. But everything I think has to be focused on what can we do to drive down costs for folks. That's the number one issue I hear from constituents.
Frank, just a quick correction on my part. Congressional District 1, not 2. I said
I heard 1. That's all I hear.
Yeah, that's all right. Yeah.
So my question goes about the oil companies, and in fact, their capability. Why aren't they drilling? And it's not because this administration has stopped them from drilling, but it's for other purposes, and one of them maybe for profit.
Yeah, it's unmitigated greed. These oil companies care about one thing, that's making profits. They are seeing historic profits, highest quarters ever. The price of a barrel of oil has declined and the price of the pump hasn't changed. They know if they increase production, the price will come down. They have no interest in doing that. And so one of the problems is the oil prices are set by a cartel called OPEC that literally, decide to reduce production to drive prices up or keep them high. This is a real problem. We have an actual piece of legislation that would subject OPEC to our antitrust laws. But the other thing is they've taken advantage of this pandemic. They've taken advantage of the war in Ukraine to just gouge consumers. Even when the price of the barrel of oil has come down, we haven't seen it reflected at the pump. So we have legislation to basically disgorge those excess profits from the oil companies and rebate it back to the consumers they gouged. We can't get a single Republican to support it, but we're seeing that in lots of areas of the economy, but particularly with the oil companies. And we have got to address that. One of the best ways, of course, to address that is make sure we're seriously investing in new energy sources, renewable energy, but that's a long-term fix. In the meantime, we have to go after them for price gouging and get that money returned back to consumers who they took it from.
Congressman, I don't normally bring up what opponents say, but it was so startling. Your opponent, when Frank asked him the other day about January 6th, he said it wasn't an insurrection, and people can see this video on whatsupnoop.com. Said it wasn't an insurrection. There wasn't any weapons present, and the only person who died was shot by a cop. We know that is not factually correct.
Well, first of all, we lost 5 police officers in connection with the events of January 6th. Dozens of police officers were seriously injured. There was substantial damage done to the Capitol building. And make no mistake about this. This was an insurrection. This was an effort led by the former president of the United States, planned, executed, financed by his closest associates to achieve one thing, and that is to overturn the results of the election and to keep President Trump in office, despite the fact the American people had elected Joe Biden as president. This was done on the very day of the meeting of the Electoral College, the day at which the official election of our president occurs under our Constitution. That represents the peaceful transfer of power from one president to the other. It has never been interrupted, even in wartime, until the January 6th events. And this was not done on any, this day was picked because they expected that they would stop the meeting of the Electoral College, either by intimidating the vice president or disrupting the proceedings. And as a result, they would get to keep Donald Trump as president, even though he lost the election. This was the single greatest threat to our democracy in my lifetime. The idea that these individuals attacked the Capitol, attacked law enforcement, and bloodied members of law enforcement, attacked them with not only knives and guns and fire extinguishers, but destroyed the parts of the Capitol building. For anyone to say it's not an insurrection, that is just a bull-faced lie. And in fact, we sadly have members of Congress who described it as a normal tourist visit. So this sort of propagating this notion of this was just another day in Washington is part of this misinformation and the propaganda. We should, whether you're a Republican, a Democrat, or an independent, everyone should be prepared to stand up for democracy and say, in America, the American people decide who is the president, not thugs and not rioters and not insurrectionists who try to use force to keep their candidate in power. And you would hope everyone would agree with that, but unfortunately, we have colleagues who are minimizing it. We have candidates who are mischaracterizing it. I wrote a whole book about this because I think it's such a grave threat to our democracy.
So I want to follow up on that because I'm baffled as to why that and the threat to our democracy as a whole just doesn't sit alone as the number one issue with the American people. Other issues we can address in one form or another, but if our democracy falls, we can't address anything. And so I'm trying to, and maybe you have some insight on why the American people, it doesn't resonate enough with them, and also why we can't go after, prosecute not only those people who were there on that day, but those people who in fact were complicit in either making this happen or in trying to cover it up.
Yeah, well, I agree with you. First, let me address the second question. I think it is absolutely the responsibility of the Department of Justice to complete its investigation and to hold every single individual from the former president on down accountable for their role in the events of January 6th, in the planning, the financing, the execution, the cover-up, and all of the resulting harm that came to our country. And I have tremendous confidence, even though it's taking a very long time. I think the Justice Department will fulfill its responsibilities and follow the evidence and apply the law. And I think the work of the January 6th committee has really laid out so much of that for the American people. So I agree with you 1,000%. The best way to make sure this never, ever happens again in America is to make sure that people who are responsible for it are held fully accountable. Because if they get away with it, it will only invite this kind of conduct again. As to your first question, kind of why is it that that's not enough? There was a poll out just a few weeks ago, maybe a month now, where the number one issue for midterm voters was defense of democracy. And I thought, on the one hand, this is horribly sad that in America, that's actually an open question. But at least I was gratified that people were paying attention. They understood the danger we were in. That's now slipped down to the second one. And I think part of the reason that it doesn't, pop is because, unfortunately, if you can't pay for your groceries to feed your family, or you can't put gas in your car to get to work, nothing else matters. And I understand that. But you are absolutely right. All of the challenges we face are much more difficult to solve and maybe impossible to solve if we don't live in a democracy. And I do think it is the single greatest threat we face. And I think it's an open question whether we're going to continue to live in a democracy in this country, because if my Republican colleagues get their way and they take power again, I don't think anyone can have confidence that if Donald Trump runs for president and loses again, that the election results will be certified by a House that is led by Kevin McCarthy as Speaker. In fact, we don't have to wonder if he would dare do that. He did it once already. He, along with 140 or 150 of his colleagues, refused to certify the last election when Donald Trump lost. So we don't have to wonder whether that could happen. It actually happened already. And so anyone who cares about voting for president and cares that their vote is actually counted should never vote for a Republican that would put Kevin McCarthy in as Speaker, because we can have no confidence that if the same thing happens, that we won't see a repeat of an effort to overturn the results of the election. And, it's shocking to me, Frank. It's sort of hard for me to understand why people don't see the gravity of this threat. And I just think our responsibility is for the next 30 days to do everything we can to make the case to the American people that the very form of government that we will have as a country is at risk and is on the ballot. We have one party that is making it more difficult for people to vote, that is affirmatively undermining elections in this country, that's promoting the big lie that Donald Trump really won the last election, that is helping to elect secretaries of state that are election deniers, that are committed to voting for Republican leaders in the House that are election deniers. This will have grave consequences for our democracy. I don't get why that isn't first and foremost on everyone's mind, but I'm going to do everything I can to keep making the case of how critical this election is for that reason alone.
Congressman, your opponent calls himself fiscally responsible, socially conscious, believes in traditional American values, follows the Constitution, and is a strong advocate for ordinary Americans like himself. He said he believes in God, family, and country. Where is that different from where you are?
Well, I'm not sure that it is. I did watch his interview. I think what he said to you is quite different from what he's tweeted out, which is very divisive and, really a very different set of views about a whole range of issues that he spoke to you about. But look, I think my record speaks for itself. I've had the privilege of representing the 1st Congressional District, and I hope to have the privilege of doing it for 2 more years. And I've done that by listening to the constituents I represent, by making sure that I'm working on behalf of everyone in Rhode Island, everyone in the 1st Congressional District, and by taking positions that I think support an economy that works for everyone, that's fully inclusive, fighting for freedoms for women to make their own healthcare decisions, for members of the LGBTQ community to live lives free from discrimination, to be sure that we are a fully inclusive state and country and value our immigrants and value all families, whatever their shape or color or size, and fighting for equality and civil rights for every American. So, I think my work on that is pretty clear. My record is very clear. I'll leave it to the voters to decide what they think of my opponent's views on those issues and the sincerity of what he said.
What do you think the threat is to women in Rhode Island if, in fact, Republicans take control of Congress and push for a nationwide ban on abortion?
Yeah,
in terms of reproductive rights?
I think it's a very, very serious threat. Look, I don't think we have to have there should be no question about it. The Republican Party has said out loud their plan is to move forward with a national abortion ban. There is already a bill in the House that's been introduced that has 157 Republican co-sponsors that essentially is a national abortion ban. It says life begins at conception. It would ban abortion in all instances. So there, and Mitch McConnell, Lindsey Graham has introduced a bill in the Senate already. So this is their plan. You know, when someone tells you what they intend to do, take them at their word. And so there's no question that's the Republican plan. The problem is if the Congress of the United States enacts a national abortion ban, it overrides state law. And so it'll be litigated, but the federal government passing a national abortion ban will have an effect on every single state, including the state of Rhode Island. So even though we took action to protect a woman's right to make her own healthcare decisions, and women are currently protected, I think everyone has to be concerned that if the Republicans get into power, that is their plan. They've said it out loud. Now, I do love all these candidates who have had these pre-election conversions and now are pro-choice. I think you have to look at their records and decide whether you actually believe that. But look, we need to have people who have long-standing records of recognizing that a decision about terminating a pregnancy is a decision that a woman makes, and it's her decision to make in consultation with her own medical team and her own faith tradition and her own family, but it's ultimately her call. And it's not a call that a bunch of politicians, mostly men in Washington, should be making. And I think it's a real issue in this election.
You know, I'll just throw a tagline in. I don't care how you feel personally and what you were doing in your own family. It's respecting somebody else's right to make that decision also.
Yeah. It's like I saw a bumper sticker and it said, if you're against abortion, don't have one.
Yeah. There you go.
Yeah. Congressman, I'm wondering what we can, if reelected, what can we get accomplished in the next couple of years that betters the life of Rhode Islanders?
Well, one of the things I hope we will do is build on the work that we did for seniors with respect to prescription drugs in the Medicare program. I've been fighting this since I got to Congress. It used to be written into the law that Medicare could not negotiate discounted prices for prescription drugs. We pay some of the highest prescription drug prices in the world, even though Medicare is the biggest purchaser of drugs. And it was because Big Pharma had that written into the law, and they spent millions of dollars lobbying and contributing to campaigns, and they always prevailed. Finally, this year, with Democrats in control, with President Biden as our leader, we finally were able to break the back of Big Pharma and can negotiate discounted prices in the Medicare program. That's going to save billions and billions of dollars, and that program should grow every year so that we can finally bring down the cost of prescription drugs. We cap the cost of insulin at $35 a month. By the way, every single Republican voted against that bill. They stood with the big pharmaceutical companies and against seniors and those on Medicare. So I hope we can build on that and do more. I hope we can do more to build on the work that we did to reduce gun violence in this country. We had some success, and I'm proud of that, but there's a lot more work to do. We have a gun violence epidemic in America. We passed my bill, the assault weapons ban, in the House with just a 2-vote margin, but it was extraordinary. We need to get these weapons of war that are the weapon of choice in almost every mass shooting in America. You can't send your kids to school. You can't go to a synagogue, a church, a movie theater, a mall without some risk of being gunned down by weapons that were designed in the Second World War to kill as many people as fast as possible. They don't belong in our neighborhoods, in our schools, in our places of worship. So I hope we can pass more common sense gun safety legislation. And then finally, I've been doing a lot of work on antitrust to really rein in big tech. We got some of those bills out of the House the week before we left. We have more work to do to restore competition, to rein in big tech, and really hold these giant monopolies accountable. And I hope we can get more done there.
I want to kind of circle back to OPEC a little bit, and what you think we should do as a country in terms of with Saudi Arabia, whether or not we ought to have certain retribution, if you will, for their actions.
Yeah, I mean, I think the president announced recently that the United States was doing a reassessment of our relationship with the Saudis, and I think it's a really important moment for that. Look, there are very serious human rights issues that remain in terms of the conduct of the Saudi government, and that have been a point of contention for a very long time. It's a very complicated relationship for obvious reasons. The region and the world they provide important intelligence collaboration and defense coordination. But I think their recent action to lead an effort to reduce the production of oil in the face of what is going to be a very challenging winter for everyone, particularly for the Europeans who have taken a pledge not to buy Russian oil to finance this brutal war. I think that is they really crossed the Rubicon in a way that is very damaging to American national security interests and to our allies around the world. And, we always have these relationships with countries. One of my assignments is the Foreign Affairs Committee. They're always complicated. There are a few countries where we agree with them and have aligned interests on every issue, but there are always complications. But our relationship with Saudi Arabia is one of the most complicated because there are places where we have real alignment of interests and places where we don't. And I think the time has come for a real reassessment. And, we have to take actions that are going to protect our own national security interests. And that involves energy and defense and economics. But I think it has to be clear to the Saudis that they cannot expect the U.S. to continue to be a good partner and ally in the face of this kind of conduct. And, I'll leave it to the president to articulate what are the right steps, but a moment for reassessment has clearly arrived.
Congressman, I know earlier this week, $6 million, the Rhode Island delegation was delivered to strengthen manufacturing. Wondering about the little guys and girls in Rhode Island, the small businesses, what can we do to help them? Obviously, it's been a tough couple of years with COVID. What are you working on for the small mom and pop shops?
Yeah, one of the responsibilities that I have as a member of Congress, and one that I take especially seriously, is making sure that I bring back to Rhode Island more than our fair share of the money that we send to Washington. And so maybe the most recent example of that, or not the most recent, one of the most important examples of that was the American Rescue Plan, where we fought hard to make sure money came back not only to the state of Rhode Island, but also to the cities and towns. And then we also made sure that because money also went to counties, that for states that didn't have counties as a form of their government, that county money went to the cities and towns, and we didn't lose that. So Newport, for example, received a little over $7 million in coronavirus fiscal recovery funds. The school district received about $7 million as well. And then in addition to that, we fought for project funding for specific projects. So we fought for $1.5 million for a project that involved the rehabilitation of the transmission line along Narragansett Avenue. We fought hard for Newport, the fire department, to receive $422,000 for a firefighters grant. Newport County Mental Health, a $750,000 grant for substance abuse. Also another $1 million grant for behavioral health at Newport County Mental Health. And so the list goes on and on. But part of that is helping all of the kind of different sectors of the economy. There's been a particular focus, of course, on small business that we included in the American Rescue Plan. It's been a really tough time for small businesses. So the PPP program to help with payroll, the grant program through the SBA, and all the money that was made available to the cities and towns is also available for economic development. So, again, on the American Rescue Plan, we didn't get a single Republican to vote for it. Now, they're all busy at the press conferences taking credit for the projects and for the infrastructure, but they didn't vote for it. But I think it was important to help small businesses, to help families get through a really, really tough time.
I wanted to turn to education a little bit. And throughout the country, we're hearing that could be as many as 40-some-odd% of the teachers that will leave the profession for one reason or another. Part of it may be pay. Part of it may be the way they're being treated within the classroom in a lot of ways, with all of this stuff about CRT and other similar issues. How do we address what could be a very severe teacher shortage in America that already is affecting a lot of areas?
Absolutely. I have just enormous respect, reverence for teachers. I think me, like everyone, has some teacher that made a real difference in their lives that they still remember and are grateful for. And, our ability to compete with the rest of the world is directly dependent on our ability to out-educate the rest of the world. And so education is the key to the success, not only of individuals, in my view, but of our state and of our country. And I think, the COVID pandemic, for the beginning of it, I think made people really understand, maybe for the first time, how important teachers are, when parents were like saddled with the idea of like sitting with their kids on Zoom while they were trying to get instruction, and they realized how hard it was to be a teacher. So I think there was this period where people really revered teachers and became to finally appreciate them for all that they do and how important they are. But as you point out, it's become even more difficult with all of these attacks on teachers, on curriculum, on school boards, threats of violence. I mean, it's just been horrific. And so I think we're seeing people, this combination of the pandemic, the combination of these really ugly circumstances, and people thinking like, you know what, I was thinking about retiring in a couple of years, I'm going to do it now. So we've got to address those issues. We've got to make sure that it's safe to be a teacher and deeply respected. We have to be sure we're compensating teachers competitively so we can keep them. And we have to let, teachers and professionals do their jobs and respect them as professionals. And, I think our kids are well behind. We're well behind to begin with. I think the pandemic has made this learning loss even more severe. So today, I had a big celebration about after school. I think we need to invest heavily in after school so we can support the learning of our kids all day, not just during school hours, but before school, after school, summer learning. But we need to make real investments. We need to address the mental health issues in schools. I think we have only begun to scratch the surface about the mental health implications of COVID and all of the economic challenges that follow that have really devastated families. And we had, a mental health issue to begin with. It's gotten much worse. And so we've got to really stay focused on that because kids can't learn and study safely and well if they're not mentally well. So I think we have a lot to do and we have to be prepared to invest resources to do it.
While speaking with local candidates on Aquidneck Island, I've been hearing a lot about, where they think our biggest opportunities are. And a lot of it comes to blue-green economy. Obviously, for years, Rhode Island was kind of known as the jewelry capital. We're huge in tourism now these days. Where do you think the biggest opportunity for Rhode Island is?
Yeah, I think a couple things. I think definitely it will continue to be in the defense sector. We have an extraordinary, submarine and the related industries in our defense sector, which is maybe one of the fastest growing areas. So that advanced manufacturing and innovation that happens in defense industries is really big. The maritime obviously continues to be a very big sector for our economy. I think we have tremendous growth opportunities in wind energy and other renewable energy. We have the first offshore wind farm in America. The opportunity for growth there is enormous, not only in the energy generation, but in the manufacturing related to the turbines and all of the related materials. So I think manufacturing is very much in the DNA of Rhode Island. That's going to continue. Textiles is another one. Advanced smart textiles. I was just at a great company that does this fascinating work with textiles. So I think those areas, higher education, healthcare will always be big parts of the Rhode Island economy. But, we have so many great companies that are, these startups, these great innovators, entrepreneurs developing new products, new services that, because of Rhode Island's size, give it a real opportunity to test market a bunch of things. So I think these, figuring out how we can seed and then help finance, because we've had great entrepreneurs, great inventors, great people who develop new products and services. One of the challenges when it comes to that second phase of funding the production, it's venture capital is harder just because it's not as much of it around. And a lot of it ends up going to Boston. So I think we've got to figure out how do we help keep those companies here when they go to the next stage, because that's where the job growth comes, when they start making the product or designing the item and marketing it. So, but we have a lot of good stuff happening in Rhode Island. I think we have to continue to make the investments we're making and to help Rhode Island continue to move forward economically.
I have one last, I think pretty easy question. And that, if you take a look at your history and what you've learned, who's the politician that you most admire? That's alive?
Doesn't have to be. Oh, the politician I always most admired that I never had an opportunity to meet was Bobby Kennedy. I always, from what I have read and have watched his speeches, I think he spoke to the grave inequality in America and the grave injustices of our country, but also of the opportunity to fix that and make America, kind of realize the full potential of this great country. So he's always been my political idol. Excellent. Congressman, we could talk for hours if we had the time.
Good, indeed.
Thanks for having me.
Of course. And we wish you the very best of luck over the next couple of weeks. And we'll have you back on to talk about your book soon.
Look forward to it. Thanks again.
All right. That is Congressman David Cicilline. And he is the incumbent and also the Democratic candidate for Congressional District number 1.
we didn't touch on, of course, and we could have talked. You're right. We could have talked for hours. So many things, but he has over ever since he was one of the individuals involved with the impeachment hearings. His status nationally has risen substantially, and you find him on a lot of major shows speaking, and he certainly carries himself well. And I think, not politicking for him or whatever, but I think he has represented. He represents an image of this state that does us well.
There you go. Well said. And we appreciate the congressman for joining us. Busy, probably jumping to one of the big networks to do an interview next.
Well, I thought he was on the big. He's going to another network, leaving this big network to go to another network.
The big network of one.
Well, just to note, there have been those who have decided that maybe they have other priorities.
That's it.
And the congressman has decided that those are people who watch this and listen to this, and who read this website are substantial enough and important enough to spend a fair amount of time with us.
That's it. And this wraps up our Congressional District 1. We have Congressional District 2 coming up next week, and you can find that schedule on whatsupnuke.com. I know we have at least Seth Magaziner joining us, and we have been in touch with Alan Fung. So we will find out if you want to. I don't think we have Fung scheduled yet, right?
No, but I'll reach out again to
excellent. Well, we'll wrap this up. I want to thank Congressman David Cicilline for joining us again. If you missed any of this, want to share it, want to watch it again, want to listen to it, you can find that on whatsupnuke.com here in just a few short minutes. Frank Prosnitz, thanks.
Thank you, Ryan.
All right, so that's going to do it for this episode. Whatsupnuke.com. You can find all of our interviews, podcasts, as well as our full interview schedule. Thanks for watching.